Hello, welcome to your forecast for Monday, May 5th through Sunday, May 11th, 2025. This week I'm actually pretty excited because there are multiple factors which are indicating we are moving forward and we can expect a lot of developments to happen this week as well as next week, both in our personal lives as well as on a societal level. And that is because of a few things, as I said. For one, Mars has recently moved out of its post shadow from its retrograde. And Mars has also moved out of its opposition to Pluto as well. You can see here as we start on Monday, Mars is at 7 Leo and Pluto is at 3 Aquarius. So it's finally moved out of orb from that opposition, which is really amazing. This is the first time in a long time that Mars has been in such a forward moving motion. Because if you'll remember, so even like way back in December, Mars was opposing Pluto before its retrograde, and then as you probably know, Mars proceeded to, go through the pre-shadow retrograde. Like the Mars retrograde cycle or process like really took a long time. It basically took 6 months in my mind, especially with this opposition to Pluto that it made. So at least in terms of what Mars is doing, Mars is completely forward moving. It's not kind of subdued by this like heavy Pluto opposition anymore. So that suggests we can really like move ahead. We can be a little bit more free spirited with our ambitions and what we find pride in. We can be outgoing and expansive in a new way that we may have not felt since basically last fall. Okay, so that's really exciting. Also, speaking of Mars direct, all planets are direct except for Pluto. Pluto recently turned direct just last week, I believe. But Pluto is, as you know, like the most distant planet that we generally consider in astrology. And so because of that, in my mind, like basically all the planets are direct. Pluto is the one outlier, and it is the least relevant in our day-to-day kind of experience on an individual level. So basically all planets are direct, and that's another huge point too. Like we just recently had all three inner planets retrograde, which is really unusual. The outer planets spend the most time retrograde. Those are pretty common. But to have Mercury, Venus, and Mars all recently retrograde is very strange. Like the last couple months may have kind of like a sticky feeling to it in your mind because things were heavy and we were trying to move forward, but even time itself may have felt differently because the three inner planets, which usually travel the fastest and usually have the most to do with our short-term kind of experience, our day-to-day or week-to-week experience, having all three of those planets move much slower than they usually do the last month or two is just really strange. It's like Mercury, Venus, and Mars were more acting like outer planets. They were really slow and intense, and they just really weren't behaving like themselves. So again, if we look at as we're starting out, getting deeper into May here, all three of those inner planets are direct. They're moving forward. Mercury is flying ahead as well. That's another point I wanted to make. Mercury is also completely done with its retrograde, totally done with its post shadow. At this point, it's speeding up. It's moving ahead very quickly, and it will eventually catch up to the sun. Not this week, but in a couple weeks, it will. So again, wherever you look, everything's moving full speed ahead. The inner planets are supporting fast movement and really making some advances in our personal lives now. And again, so are all these fire planets as well. I don't know if I know I mentioned it last week, but we do have still 4 planets in Aries if you include Chiron. And then as we start out the week, we have 2 in Leo, Mars and the moon. So I just realized I'm showing the wrong page. I'm so sorry. Here we go. Now you're seeing what I'm seeing here. Okay, so this is the chart for Monday, May 5th. And yeah, let's just go ahead and get into the day by day forecast. The moon will be transiting from Leo through Scorpio this week, so it is kind of unfortunately ending these like signs that it's really comfortable in between Taurus and Leo, and it will enter like a little bit more kind of rocky terrain, so to speak, as it gets into these fall signs. I do think moon does pretty decently in Virgo and Libra, especially Libra. But then, once later this week, Moon will enter Scorpio where it will be in fall. One more thing about the Moon, too, before we actually get into the day by day forecast. So this week is unique because technically we don't have any kind of quarter moon or full moon or new moon this week. But that's because this week is sandwiched by the first quarter moon in Leo on Sunday the 4th and the full moon at 22 Scorpio that will happen on Monday the 12th, if that makes sense. So in other words, we have a quarter moon right before this week, and then we've got a full moon right after this week. So that suggests, at least in terms of what the moon is doing, I picture kind of like a bowl of intensity. So like the week starts out very intense coming off of that first quarter moon, and then at the end of the week that we're going to ramp up in intensity as we prepare for the full moon. Also, there's going to be a pattern midweek with the moon where so Thursday, Friday, early Saturday, Moon will be transiting through Libra, and as it does so, things may be unusually intense. Moon in Libra is typically probably the most peaceful transit, I would say, out of all the moon sign transits. But that may not be the case this week because as the moon transits through Libra, it will oppose all four of those bodies in Aries, Neptune, Venus, Mercury, and then Chiron. So yeah, I'll get into the specifics as I get through the day-by-day forecast. I did want to mention I am doing readings again. I jacked up my rates for a few months because I was kind of just taking a break. And so, I just had some other things to do in my personal life that I was kind of putting more time and energy to. But I'm back online now. I'm doing the forecast again, as you can see, and I'm definitely willing and able to do any readings if you would like that. If you are interested, you can check out my website, manic.mercurian.net, or email me at manic.mercurian@gmail.com. All of that information is in the description of every video that I post. But yeah, I did just slash the rates pretty dramatically. I basically cut all my rates in half. So if you are interested, now might be a good time to check that out as well. Okay, so let's look at Monday, May 5th, 2025. So here we start out the day with Moon in Leo. And again, this is going to be very intense. So Monday looks like one of the most intense days for the week, especially early Monday. So if you're in North America or Europe, or I guess South America or Africa, the first half of the day is going to be very intense. And that's because we still have Moon in Leo. So not only is that a fire placement, fire transits tend to be more intense. But again, if you look at the rest of the chart, Chiron, Mercury, Venus, and Neptune all in Aries, and then Mars and Moon in Leo. So there are just so many fiery transits right now, and again, some of these transits are actually trining one another as well. Mars has a loose trine to Venus right now, and throughout the morning, Moon will be in the very early morning, Moon will trine Mercury, and then soon after that, it will trine Chiron. So again, once you add in like all these fire planets, all these fire transits, and a few trines thrown in here and there. It just adds up to a lot of intensity. If you have a lot of fire in your chart, this is going to feel very natural to you. You're going to be very much in your element, and you'll feel empowered and very capable. You may actually feel like too confident. It may bring out your fiery qualities, in a good way, but maybe even like too much of a good thing. For the rest of us, though, like we can take advantage of this by being kind of like a fire sign, if that makes sense. So. So if you do want to move ahead, if you do really want to express yourself and, be a little bit self-focused right now, now is a great time to do so for sure. And again, we're still just kind of coming off of that first quarter moon that happened one day prior. So first quarter moons, or even give or take a day, like even on Monday, being that close to a first quarter moon, that also is a great indicator for, if you want to start something new, if you want to change something, maybe even in a dramatic way, obviously use your discernment, but now is a great time for making change and starting something new. This does change to some degree. So in the last half of the day, Moon does enter Virgo. And so, of course, the vibe becomes like a little bit subdued, right? So Moon moves from a fire sign to an earth sign. Things become much heavier, much more grounded. Much slower, right? The earth signs are much slower than the fire signs. Also, as we move away from that first quarter moon, the energy is lessening in intensity as well. So that shows really intense start of the day. Honestly, I kind of like that for a Monday morning. I think it's good to just, let's just like throw ourselves into the chaos. Let's start something that would be kind of typical for Monday. But yeah, things do become a little bit more chill, let's just say, a little bit more productive. I guess it's all productive. It's just more chaotic and disruptive in the morning, and more about like the long term kind of in the afternoon. Okay, Tuesday, May 6th continues that same transit. Moon continues through Virgo. And at this point, it's actually approaching a trine to the sun. Depending on your time zone, Moon may trine the sun very late on Tuesday or perhaps very early on Wednesday. But either way, we're kind of within orb, within a day of Moon trining the sun. And I've noticed this is always a positive omen. Almost always, let's just say. Moon trining the sun is just great. It's becoming a waxing gibbous moon, I believe. So that means that we are like building something, right? The moon is gaining more and more light each day, each night, and right now at this particular time with moon's in harmony with the sun. And what else? Neither the moon nor the sun, neither one is in detriment, neither one is debilitated. They're both, somewhat happy in these earth signs. And so yeah, I would say this points to a overall collective kind of good mood, so to speak. Things are a little bit more balanced now as well. We do still have 5 planets in fire, so more in fire than any other element. But now with moon and earth, moon and sun are in the earth signs, Virgo and Taurus respectively. So yeah, I do think that tempers the fire quite a bit. Combining fire with earth is, I would say, the most productive. You can get the most done, especially in like real, like physical terms. We have the youthful, like spirited energy of the fire, the boldness and the big dream kind of energy, the expansion, but also the groundedness of these earth luminaries as well. So I actually really like this chart. Despite the fire dominance, I do think things are relatively well balanced. We even have 2 air planets as well. 1 water planet, that would be Saturn. Saturn's on its way out of Pisces. It will enter Aries later in the month. But yeah, things look pretty well balanced. Tuesday is going to feel a lot like Monday afternoon, if that makes sense. Let's look at Wednesday. I'm sorry. There's 2 aspects for Tuesday. So one would be Mercury conjoining Chiron at 24 Aries. And the other aspect is Venus sextiling Pluto at, Venus at 3 degrees Aries with Pluto at 3 degrees Aquarius. So let's start with Venus and Pluto. This one's funky. This one's weird. So most aspects with Venus tend to be very harmonious, right? It's hard to catch Venus on a bad day. Venus is pretty positive, and this is a sextile. Sextiles are also very harmonious, very positive, very beautiful. There's a couple reasons why this one is weird though. So Pluto is not like Venus at all. I would, in my experience, aspects with Pluto or heavy Pluto transits tend to be pretty dark, and in my experience it actually it almost doesn't matter if it's a trine or even if it's a harmonious aspect like a sextile here. It's still Pluto. Pluto is so intense, it's so heavy. It tends to still bring out like the darkness, like you're really you're viewing everything in a kind of grittier way with a Pluto aspect. Another reason why this is, despite the sextile, this is, I would say, a kind of dark or twisted aspect. And that would be because both of these planets are debilitated. I know technically the Pluto's signs of exaltation and fall are not universally agreed upon, and many people would disagree with me on this, but I personally believe that Pluto is exalted in Leo and in fall in Aquarius. And Venus's signs of detriment and those are much more agreed upon. Venus rules Libra, so it's in detriment in Aries. So my point is, Venus is making this like this nice phone call, so to speak, to Pluto. Like it's a a harmonious conversation, a harmonious connection. But because it's Pluto, it's still Pluto. Pluto's always going to be dark and heavy. It can be positive for sure. You can use Pluto for growth, but it's kind of like Saturn in a way, right? Saturn is never cuddly. I think Pluto is the same, maybe even more intense. Pluto's always heavy. It's always dark. Can it be positive? Yeah. You can be positive and heavy. You can be dark and positive, but it's still dark. And then again, both are having this like not lovely chat. They're having this positive chat, but both are not happy. Both are not acting like themselves. So what does that mean? So this is going to be especially relevant to you if you have placements around 3 degrees Aries or around 3 degrees Aquarius, or perhaps maybe opposing those. So like 3 degrees Leo, 3 degrees Libra. You may especially feel this, but this is going to really challenge us to, how do I put this? With Venus in Aries, we may feel a little bit insecure with our relationships, our finances, whatever supports us, whatever we enjoy. We may be kind of re-examining these things right now because Venus is in detriment. Jupiter is also in detriment, and I talked about that last week. So with both the great benefics and detriment, everything that would typically give us joy and pleasure, we can still have our pleasure, we can still have our joy, but again, we're going to be re-examining all that. We're going to be looking at it maybe in a more critical lens. We may have to look more out of the box. We may have to look to something unexpected or unusual to get that kind of pleasure and expansion and to support ourselves, if that makes sense. So anyway, with the sextile to Pluto, this kind of just shines a flashlight. It shines a spotlight on all of that. It's I picture Pluto aspects kind of like really harsh lighting where you see every like wrinkle in your face, and it's like you don't want to see that, but it's the truth. And despite the sextile, Pluto is that kind of harsh lighting. It's saying, hey, you need to look at this. Things that you thought areas that you thought you may have been very secure in, and that you have dealt with certain stuff and you're done. Pluto's going to bring that back up. It's going to, unearth everything and dig it back up. So specifically with, again, like things we enjoy, things we use to support ourselves, however you support yourself, like how do you support yourself financially or with your relationships? These are things that, it is a sextile. This is going to be more harmonious than if this were like a square, for example, but it still may be uncomfortable, but it could be an opportunity for improving the way you support yourself, improving the things that you enjoy. Do you actually enjoy them? Are they actually good for you? These kind of analytical questions you may be asking yourself. Mercury conjunct Chiron is, I hate to say it, but it's also kind of weird. Neither of these aspects are like crazy intense, or I don't think either of these are going to totally like upthrow anyone's life, generally speaking. But Mercury conjunct Chiron is weird as well. Chiron is also out of place right now. Chiron is, I would say, sort of in detriment in Aries, which is strange because technically Chiron kind of rules Virgo, but the detriment should be opposite the sign it rules. But I think with Chiron kind of rules Virgo and to a lesser extent Libra, and then it's out of place in Aries, basically. Like Chiron is the planet or the planetoid for empathy, right? So putting it in Aries, which is kind of the most individualistic sign, the most selfish sign, it's out of place. So Mercury is kind of providing a channel for Chiron. Mercury, as you know, has to do with intellect and communication, and so having these two kind of coupled together, this kind of paves the way for having deep and intense conversations. Okay, so I've also noticed that with Chiron and Aries, there have been a lot of protests ever since Chiron entered Aries in 2018. So this whole energy of I'm going to speak my truth. I don't care what you think about it. I'm tired of not speaking my truth. I'm tired of feeling like I don't have a say, or like I'm not allowed to say these things. I'm not allowed to talk about things that have happened to me. I'm going to say these things now. That's kind of the energy of Chiron in Aries. So Mercury crossing over Chiron kind of just provides, it's like Mercury's giving Chiron a microphone, It's like saying, hey, yeah, let's talk about these things. Let's think about these things, So we may be more aware of kind of our any kind of like secrets or personal traumas or wounds, anything that we feel like we can't talk about. We may be more aware of those things. Also, with Mercury crossing Chiron, the empathy may be boosted. And I always say, like, that sounds nice, um, but with Chiron, it can often be very awkward. We may not always want to like read everyone's minds, right? We may not always want everyone to know what we're thinking and feeling, especially if maybe we don't know these people very well. And likewise, we may not always want to know what everyone else is thinking and feeling. It can be very difficult to manage all that. And honestly, I think we have walls and barriers for a reason. I don't think we're evolved enough as a species to have like unlimited empathy. We're just not there yet, and so that can be very uncomfortable. So anyway, so this aspect can be very uncomfortable, but again, it can create a like kind of like a platform for having deep and meaningful conversations, especially if we're ready for it. Maybe we are at a stage where we're ready to build like a deeper level of empathy with someone. I think it's very situational. Um, but yeah, again, I know I feel like what I'm saying sounds very intense, and I guess in a way it is, but at the same time, these are two sort of like minor aspects. I mean, they're major aspects to be technically correct, but they're minor in the sense that Venus sextiling Pluto, Mercury conjoining Chiron. Um, I view Chiron as less impacting as the other planets, and maybe even Pluto. I mean, Pluto is a more long term energy, so these are not the end of the world. They're just two kind of flukes. There's two upticks in some strange energy on Tuesday. Okay, let's look at Wednesday. So Wednesday, May 7th, Moon continues through Virgo. It actually will cross over the South Node today. So it's kind of like plunging into the underworld, so to speak. It's going under the plane or the disk that the solar system like lies on, that the moon tends to lie on, if that makes sense. So that can be kind of darker in nature. But again, I think Moon in Virgo is an underrated transit. Of course, I have my own biases. But Moon in Virgo is pretty harmonious, generally speaking. We tend to want to be practical. We want to get organized. We want to communicate our thoughts and feelings. So that continues on Wednesday, and again, Moon is still pretty close to that trine with the Sun. So I know what I said for Tuesday is a little contradictory. There are some indicators that show really harmonious time Tuesday and Wednesday. There are also those kind of strange aspects on Tuesday. So all are true, all are coinciding. So that kind of continues to a lesser extent on Wednesday. Mercury is still pretty close to Chiron. It's only about a degree away, noon Eastern time on Wednesday. And then Venus is also only about 1 degree away from that sextile to Pluto. So all that kind of weird funkiness that I talked about on Tuesday, that sort of continues on Wednesday. So again, Tuesday and Wednesday are really strange. Like there is this general background, like really harmonious, stable, positive energy. But then there's also all of those kind of weird dynamics that I talked about on Tuesday. Those peak on Tuesday, but they seep into Wednesday to a lesser extent as well. So I think everyone will have very varied experiences Tuesday and Wednesday, especially Tuesday, but also Wednesday. It kind of just depends on your outlook. It depends on what you focus on, and it depends on your aspects as well. Depending on, do you have placements that are more clustered around this moon sun trine at, I believe it's like 17 Virgo, 17 Taurus. If you have placements around those signs or even 17 Capricorn, you're going to feel that harmoniousness. You're going to feel like really stable and positive. And you're going to see that in other people as well. But if you have placements more around 24 Aries or 3 degrees Aquarius or Aries, then you're going to pick up on more of that like tension and that kind of weirdness, so to speak, from those two aspects I talked about. So it really just depends, and it may be a mixed bag for many of us as well. But yeah, that Wednesday is almost kind of like a continuation of Tuesday, just not like quite as intense, if that makes sense. Going to Thursday, May 8th, Moon actually enters Libra pretty early in the day, Eastern time. So yeah, generally speaking, Moon in Libra is one of my favorite transits, as well as one of my favorite like natal placements as well. I believe Moon loves the Venus ruled signs. So Moon is exalted in Taurus, but Moon does pretty well in Libra as well. Libra is just it's so focused on like foresight and self-awareness, and not just self-awareness but awareness of other people's thoughts and feelings. So it just tends to be a very, very chill, low-key, very harmonious moon transit. But as I mentioned in the intro, it's a little different this week. So even on Thursday, very early in the day, Eastern time, as soon as Moon enters Libra, it opposes Neptune. So Moon at 1 degree Libra early in the day opposes Neptune at 1 Aries. So that's really strange. We have these oppositions. Oppositions tend to be pretty intense. They have to do with culminations. This is the moon we're talking about. So keep in mind, any aspect that the moon makes is like very quick, way quicker than any planet, as you probably know. So that will only take up maybe just like a few hours or several hours at most on like Thursday morning for most of us. But yeah, there can be some weirdness there. There can be, I don't know, I'd imagine if you're sleeping with Moon opposing Neptune, especially if you have placements around 1 degree of Libra or Aries, you may have some like really strange dreams or strange feelings or dreams that seem to kind of not make sense, or they seem to be very spontaneous. They don't really have any kind of cause. Like they don't seem to make sense, right? You may feel like very inspired and enlightened for no particular reason, or you may feel very scared and paranoid and not know why. You know what I mean? And then that kind of continues. I mean, it does change a lot, but by noon Eastern time, Moon steps into an opposition to Venus. So again, there's this kind of clash. Like with these clashes in general, we keep experiencing the two sides of the Libra Aries axis, which mostly has to do with relationships and self-expression. In other words, throughout Thursday as well as Friday and early Saturday, we're going to be dealing with this opposition, or this duality of self versus other. So in other words, how do I express myself? How do I honor my own needs, my own self-expression, my own thoughts and feelings, while also honoring the thoughts and feelings of other people? Like, at first glance, it may seem like those two things are incompatible, but actually they are compatible. Like, to truly honor someone else's feelings, you have to be authentic with your own, right? And so that's where, with any polarity that we see in astrology, like on a more primitive level, these two are conflicting, but in a way, in a more enlightened way, these two actually kind of bleed into each other. They actually support each other, if that makes sense. They're complementary. Um, so that's kind of what we're going to be dealing with. Around starting about noon Eastern time, Moon opposes Venus, and so there's this. I would imagine this would be especially weird considering that Venus just sextiled Pluto. So there's this recent new kind of painful self-awareness that we have with how we express ourselves, what we enjoy, what we take pleasure in, how we support ourselves. So there's this recent kind of new painful self-awareness in the last few days. And then now Moon kind of triggers this again. Moon brings this up again as it simultaneously trines Pluto and opposes Venus, basically. So it's basically asking you, like, what have you just learned? Like, what is this new awareness? Like, have you applied it? It's bringing all these things up again. Is there a better way to support yourself? Is there, do your pleasures, whatever you enjoy, does it actually work for you? I think a lot of what we enjoy is toxic in nature, and so we have to kind of retrain ourselves to actually find pleasure in things that are truly good for us, right? I think that's a struggle that many of us are dealing with right now. So yeah, these issues may kind of come to play. Again, this is going to be very fast paced, though. It's going to come up for like a few hours, maybe several hours at most, and then the energy will change again. Okay. Let's go to Friday. So Friday, Moon continues through Libra. So a lot of these same themes that I talked about for Thursday continue on Friday. In a way, it almost reminds me of the beginning of the week. The beginning of the week, there's these, like, the moon would be in a really harmonious place, but then there's these weird aspects that are brought up. It's kind of similar for Thursday and Friday with Moon in Libra. That would typically be really harmonious, but there's these weird aspects, right? So Friday, Moon continues through Libra. it doesn't make a whole lot of aspects today, but it is still on a more, depending on what orb you use, if you want to look at it from a more general perspective, Moon is very loosely opposing all the Aries planets today. So again, there's still this kind of like conflict, so to speak. We want to be harmonious and very chill and kind of just, intellectual, like Moon and Libra would support us in doing. But there's all these Aries planets that are kind of conflicting with that. So really the question is about balance, right? Yeah, honestly, I think that's kind of all I have to say about Friday. The only other thing is that Moon is gaining light, right? And it's only one sign away from the full moon. So in other words, like it's only like about 2.5 days from the full moon in Scorpio. So as we're kind of going through all this in the background, the energy is building because the moon's light is building with each passing day. So there is this kind of like kind of subtle background energy that is building, 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 and it's getting more intense as we approach that full moon. Going to Saturday, May 10th, two bodies change signs today, which is kind of interesting. Moon leaves Libra and enters Scorpio just after noon Eastern time. And then also kind of just before noon Eastern time, Mercury leaves Aries and enters Taurus. So this is really funky and interesting because as Mercury and the Moon are changing signs, you can see here they're basically opposing each other. Like they make this opposition very close to the same time that both of them change signs. So pretty interesting. So in other words, sometime on Saturday or Saturday in general, there's this huge kind of change with Moon and Mercury opposing each other and changing signs at the same time. So there's going to be like a clear cutoff there for most of us. There's going to be some kind of chapter ending, some kind of chapter beginning. Mercury was in Aries for a long time because it retrograded there. It did retrograde back into Pisces a little bit. So I guess in a more general way, you could say Mercury was in Pisces/Aries for a very long time, much longer than Mercury usually spends in signs. So we are finally leaving that chapter. I also talked last week about how for so much of the beginning of this year, we had such a heavy cluster in Pisces and Aries in general. So I think that's another reason why Mercury entering Taurus is such a big deal. We're moving away from this Pisces Aries cluster, this like nebulous, intense, really creative energy, but also very chaotic energy. So in other words, the beginning of this year was so creative, it was so chaotic. We're finally moving away from that and getting a little bit more footing, a little bit more grounded energy with Mercury entering Taurus. So I think that's good. I mean, change is hard, but at the same time, there was so much change with all the Pisces and Aries transits, if that makes sense. So this is a change from the change. We're changing into something a little bit more stable with Mercury in Taurus. And then also with the moon entering Scorpio, moon changing signs is usually not a big deal at all, right? It happens every 2.5 days or so, or 2.4 days or whatever. But this is a big deal. So not only, like I said, moon is opposing Mercury, that in itself makes this change a little bit more significant. But also, as I alluded to or touched on, moon is entering Scorpio where it will be full as well. So I do think that's significant as it enters that sign, the sign where it will be full. We're within the realm of a full moon, basically. The moon is going to appear very full if you see it around this time. So yeah, both moon and Mercury are changing things. What else? Moon is in fall in Scorpio, so there is a huge difference between moon in Libra versus moon in Scorpio. Like I said, moon in Libra is just so harmonious, very chill, very intellectual. Moon entering Scorpio is very heavy. Moon is in fall in Scorpio, so we may feel a little bit uneasy. We may feel a little bit unusual. We have a lot of debilitated planets in general as well, which is generally unusual for this time of year. Usually it's spring, like especially late spring and summer, where we have the most planets kind of in their home signs, generally speaking, and maybe early fall, and then it's more like early spring and late fall where we have the most debilitated planets usually. But this year, like right now, so once moon enters Scorpio, we'll have moon debilitated. As I said, I believe Pluto's debilitated, Jupiter, Venus, Uranus in Taurus, and I think that's it. Hopefully I'm not forgetting any, but it's a lot of debilitated planets. So That just indicates we are not feeling like ourselves right now, and it's just going to ramp up this weekend with the moon debilitated. And I always give my spiel on debilitated planets. I'll give you the plus and the negative, right? Everyone wants to know, is this good or bad? Generally, I guess you could say it's bad. I personally love debilitated planets, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But generally, yeah, I think debilitated planets and transits are more difficult, generally speaking. Things are simpler with planets in their home signs, right? The planets act like we expect them to act. It's more simple, it's more straightforward, generally more positive. But with debilitated planets, the positive is that because we're not feeling like ourselves, we can look at things from a different perspective. There's a lot of uniqueness and richness in debilitated placements. With every debilitated placement, there is a certain kind of superpower, like I've said before. So, for instance, with Moon entering Scorpio, it's debilitated because Moon has to do with emotions, and Scorpio is the most emotionally intense sign. So, Moon in Scorpio is intense, it's dark, we feel unsettled. Like, Scorpio is always looking at things kind of in a glass half empty perspective. Scorpio is among the most cynical signs, right? And it's very ambitious. Moon prefers the signs that are a little bit more chill and kind of complacent. And so Scorpio is it's always focused on change and improving things because it sees all the kind of negative in things, if that makes sense. So with Moon in Scorpio, we may feel uneasy. We may see kind of the grit of everything, the dirt and the cracks and the wrinkles, so to speak. Like we see all these like details. Scorpio is hyper aware. And that leads me again to the superpower of Moon in Scorpio. With Moon in Scorpio, it's an extremely intuitive placement, intuitive transit. Scorpio is just on an overdrive more than any other sign, in the sense that Scorpio is extremely analytical. It's extremely emotionally aware and intuitive. It's like in a survival mode, so all of its senses are just heightened. So to some extent, we all experience that with Moon in Scorpio, especially with Moon so close to being full in Scorpio as it is now. So that increased awareness, that may feel very uncomfortable, very strange. But on the other hand, we can use that. We can use that for really a lot of different things, any kind of creative endeavor, or we can use it like socially as well to be very perceptive with others. We can turn that awareness to ourselves and become more self-aware. Like really anything that has to do with awareness is, I think, more achievable with Scorpio transits, especially Moon transiting Scorpio. So anyway, so yeah, things, like I said, things kind of ramp up in intensity at the end of the week. This week is really strange because despite there not being a whole lot of aspects, there is a lot changing and a lot going on. So yeah, just to summarize, we start the week with that intensity from the first quarter moon. In some ways, the intensity dies down in the middle of the week, but then we have all these kind of weird aspects that are really changing things. And then the intensity really ramps up toward the end of the week as we kind of go into that full moon. So the last thing would be Sunday, May 11th. No aspects per se, but pretty much most of the themes that I discussed with Saturday are continuing in Sunday and actually intensifying. Because Mercury is getting into Taurus. Moon leaves that opposition that it made to Mercury, but it crosses over Lilith today, and then it's just approaching that full moon. And as I mentioned before, the full moon will be exact on Monday, the 12th at 22 degrees. So it's probably going to happen late Monday for most of us. But yeah, Sunday, increased intensity, increased awareness. We're going through a lot of heavy themes right now. Really, yeah, I can't talk about Sunday without talking about the full moon, because despite the full moon not happening on Sunday, we're close enough that you're going to start to experience the themes of the full moon. And what I've noticed about the Scorpio full moon every year is that it's a particularly revealing full moon. Like, things that you didn't know about before, you will become aware of on and after this full moon in Scorpio. I think the Scorpio full moon is the best at like shining a spotlight, because the sun is shining from Taurus, but it's lighting up the moon in Scorpio, if that makes sense. So it's kind of shining a spotlight on Scorpio, And Scorpio is all about, uncovering the mysteries, uncovering the secrets, and really, really seeing everything for better or for worse, like seeing every little part of how everything works, right? So yeah, that's the main thing I would say for Sunday. But I will, of course, go more into the meaning of this full moon for next week's forecast for sure. Yeah, but otherwise, again, if you are interested in getting reading, just check out the description. All of my information is there. But otherwise, I really hope you have a very productive week. This does look very exciting, as I said. But otherwise, I hope this helps. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.